If you missed the artist's talk, I'm delighted to welcome Monique back to the Vivien to talk about her work in this show.
So I kind of locked myself away for a year in a garage, learning how to paint and what paint could do and what paint couldn't do. But I was really interested in abstraction, and so that's kind of what I did. And as I progressed, I learned really that I was interested in making surfaces. And as I went along, I found that my painting became more sculptural. So the canvases I used became boards, and the boards came away from the wall. I also decided at that point that I would not worry about selling any work. I would just make what I wanted to make, and I was just really interested to see what it was that I would actually make if there were no boundaries. And so it turned out that I wasn't really making paintings per se, although there is definitely a painterly aspect to the practice. I mean, it sits somewhere between painting and sculpture, and that's essentially the boundaries that I'm sort of investigating. Yeah, so the use of boxes came about really in trying to find a sculptural form that I could manipulate by myself. Prior to these boxes, I was working with garden recycling sacks, and I was hanging those off the wall in kind of like quite a sculptural way. But they were really horrific to work with. They were really smelly and just like not really great. And so I thought, well, maybe I need to look for some other material. And I like the idea of working with things that are not from an art store, so they don't have that context. And I like packaging materials. I always was around packaging materials when I had a retail business, always packaging, cardboard. And so wandering around a hardware store, I came across boxes, and I thought, I'll give this a go and see what I can make with a box. Like the simplest of materials, a box and duct tape. What can you make with a box and duct tape? What can you make that is the most concise iteration of the thing? Like, how can you reduce it to its essence, really? How can I make a sculptural form that I can hang on the wall? And so the box seemed like a fairly sort of direct way of doing it. I come from Holland, and Holland is, there's a lot of people in a small country, and it has some beautiful architecture, and it has a lot of Bauhaus architecture, and there's a lot of modernist buildings, like apartment buildings. I was brought up in one of those, and so you get this idea of sort of all boxed together, so that sort of grid-like linear sort of form is apparent everywhere. I used to cycle past the Rietveld house every day on my way to school, an architectural sort of icon. I think it's like the seventh wonder in the world or something along those lines. And so I think it is a sort of for me, it is very much part of my culture, that box shape, having lived in a box really for a long time. The idea of using a box is that it functions both as surface and as form. So it has a twofold property for me. The process that I apply to these boxes is they get taped up, they get plastered, often using strips like you use for a plaster cast. And then they are cured. So then they sit for a number of days or weeks, depending on the weather, in the studio to let them get really, really hard. The only way to manipulate them is by applying weight to them, because they're really rock solid at that point. And so then it's just a matter of applying weight to it, either by standing on it, sitting on it, or leaning on it, whichever way you like. And that sort of determines the form. And then it's trying to get it to a point of collapse, but not quite. It's just hovering on a very fine line. It's quite a precarious process, because even though the plaster is really hard, once you start crushing it, it becomes incredibly fragile. And there are a lot of boxes that don't make the cut because they've just gone too far. So you take them over the edge when they just become a mess. So that's largely the process. If the boxes are at a stage whereby they hold their form, but they are too structurally unsound, then resin is applied to hold the structure together, and that gives it the ultimate strength. Sometimes I think I'll be making something and it turns into something else. So there is an intention, say, that I might make something square, but then when you crush it, if you stand on something, that shape might not be quite what you thought it was. So then you kind of go with that happy accident, if you like, So the word crackle had a number of processes applied. Initially it was produced with cardboard, duct tape and plaster and painted. And then subsequently another layer of plaster was applied to see what would happen if colour came through from underneath the work, because mostly my works are monochromes. The works that stand out for me are probably the work Toast, which is really small work, but it was one of my earlier iterations of these boxes where I actually sort of started to think, yeah, this could be something for me. This is what I could progress with. And it was also a nice sort of, the word toast was sort of like, I'm quite a flippant person, or I'm not that serious. And so toast, I sort of like, I felt it suited the work and it suited the direction it was going. I'm not saying that my work is, that I don't take my work seriously. I really take it seriously, very much so. But I think you don't always have to be serious about things. And so the word toast sort of embodied that whole thing. So I really like it from that perspective. And again, it also goes for the word blowhole. Just the name was just, I really enjoyed the name. And it was quite a concise iteration of the work, a cardboard box with pigments. There you go. And that was the work. So it's sort of reduced right down. So I enjoy these. But as a maker, and really taking everything else away from that, as a maker, the really complex surfaces are quite enjoyable to make. And so a work like Black Crack, which is quite a sort of dense, intense surface, is really very nourishing for me as a maker. The practice looks not only at, the line between painting and sculpture, but it also looks at trying to collapse the line between minimalism and the Baroque. So even though the colours, they're a uniform colour over a work, which is largely associated with minimalism, the form often is quite Baroque in the sense that it's heavily worked. So a work like, say, Crackle or Black Crack or whatever, they are heavily worked surfaces, and so there is a Baroqueness about that. And I'm trying to sort of balance on that line where they sort of meet in the middle and trying to collapse them. And really, thinking about minimalism, how it was largely really a male-centered era of, art making, and you think of the likes of Donald Judd, and everything that was associated with that, like it was a male-dominant society, and I think as a woman sort of, paddling in that pool, if you like, and sort of saying, hey boys, it's time to move over, like it's getting a bit old, this game for you boys, my turn. And I think that's really what I'm interested in, so yeah. I'm interested in art that makes you feel something, have a reaction to it. I think there is nothing worse than being dismissed, that somebody just walks past your work and goes like, whatever, I find I do it myself, in galleries and museums. You just go, you walk through, a large space with a lot of work and you go, yeah, And that's really horrible, I think, as a maker, and so I think it's great that people are polarized about whether they think it's something or nothing. At least they think about it, and they have an opinion about it. Yes, it's a cardboard box, but is it more than a cardboard box? I mean, they are made through a measure of construction and deconstruction, and they're not perfect on the wall. And perhaps there is something in that, you know, maybe they are nice on the outside or they are gold on the outside, but what's on the inside, you know, and isn't that sort of a reflection of something else, you know? It's perhaps as people or perhaps as a society, you know, we look like one thing, but really is something else happening. The exhibition is on until the 22nd of July, and it would be lovely if you could come along and have a look at my work and at Rebecca's work. It's a fabulous show, we think, and it will be great to see you here at the Vivien in Matakana.